We live in an urban age. More than 50% of the world's population lives in cities, and with 2 million people moving to cities every week, it's projected to be over 70% by 2050. In Australia, we're already one of the most urbanised countries in the world, with over 90% of our population living in cities today. And it's no wonder we gravitate to cities. They're places of opportunity, employment, education, health benefits, as well as quality of life. They're also open, diverse, innovative, and culturally complex. So it's no wonder they're the places we want to be. But the most successful cities are always in a state of flux. And the thing is, right now, the pace of change is accelerating and the impacts are growing. Australian cities like Sydney are one of the fastest growing in the developed world, and with that comes challenges. It's also considered to be one of the most livable cities in the world, but if we want it to stay that way, we need to tackle the problems that are facing us now. Like many large cities, we have problems of growing inequality and unsustainable environmental demand. The economist Thomas Piketty has written for some time about the growing divide globally between the haves and the have-nots. And unfortunately, this pattern is equally true in Sydney, where the growing inequality plays out spatially across a range of issues. Now, in this map here, visualising the income inequality across Sydney, you can see a disturbing trend: the rise of suburban disadvantage and income polarisation. And I hate to say it, but the maps for health, education, and environmental outcomes are disturbingly similar. Over the past 30 years, the socio-economic divide in Sydney has grown, and much of the suburban fringe has become characterised by low-density sprawl, lower incomes, car dependency, lack of jobs, services, and transport. With uneven investment and opportunity comes other impacts. If you're one of the lucky ones, living closer to the city with a good job, you are probably doing better than most. But with increased demand, affordability puts pressure on stress, on infrastructure and services everywhere. Sydney is at a crossroads. Our city is growing at an unprecedented rate. By 2050, the population will grow to 8 million on current projections. That's an increase of 80%. 80% on today. The pace and scale of development is already upon us. And at the moment, you can see that much of the transformation in our own city is being undertaken by large-scale infrastructure projects and large housing estates and what we might commonly call mega projects. Some of these have the potential to transform a place, a precinct or a city in an unbelievably positive way. But unfortunately, many do not. Many impose collateral damage more than improve the current situation. Sometimes they benefit the few at the expense of the many. Massive in scale and singular in purpose, they often exacerbate rather than improve the current state. And take, for example, any number of large-scale urban residential estates, secure enclaves of social advantage or disadvantage, depending on your postcode. Or the new wave of monolithic freeway projects that divide more communities and ecosystems than they join. This needs to change. We can't just keep on rolling out paradigms that we know are not going to improve the urban condition for most of us, in fact, everyone. We need to do things differently. As the built environment is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, architects and designers have a central role in shaping our cities. But interestingly, Over 60% of the buildings or the built environment that exists today, and in cities like New York or Hong Kong, it's well over 80%, will exist in 2050. So regeneration, adaptive reuse, and retrofit are absolutely keys to the future city. In contrast, over 75% of the infrastructure that will exist in 2050 hasn't been built. It'll be new. And so the possibility for new generation infrastructure, which is integrated and transformative, is also an opportunity. Clearly, contemporary transformation needs to employ a range of strategies, but rebalancing uneven growth is absolutely crucial in any of these scenarios for a much more livable city. Already, a range of initiatives are being rolled out in cities globally that set new benchmarks in balancing social, environmental, and economic agendas. And cities that are getting it right focus on interconnected complementary strategies. Oops, I think I just lost everything then. That work together, delivering much more than the sum of the parts. Cities as diverse as Vancouver, London, Copenhagen, Seoul, and even more lately Sydney, have embraced much more collaborative, multi-layered approaches to city making that can provide valuable lessons. And I'd like to share some of these with you. The first is that all of these cities have started with 3 key moves. The first is a clear and compelling and shared vision, asking the question, what kind of city do we want? And what kind of city is going to be good for everybody? Secondly, a political leadership with the mandate to drive it and make it happen. And thirdly, a suite of strategies to implement it, both big and small, tactical and strategic, that balance global city agendas with local needs. And it's clear by aligning political will, policy, plans, projects with public participation and public sector buy-in, unbelievable benefits can be achieved at multiple scales. So I'd like to share, So I'd like to share one particular case study that I think has relevance to Western Sydney and the challenges we face in our city. London. London had an agenda for revitalisation of the South East Corridor, the most deprived part of London, way back in the 1980s, and had incrementally put in place a series of plans and policies that were incrementally being rolled out. The opportunity to shift growth from central London to the east was recognised by both sides of the political landscape, both right and left, and continued through different tenures and time. They recognised a range of strategies were needed to enable this to happen. Robust plans laid a framework, and much more innovative and adaptive strategies, such as the East London Green Grid, which was a citywide green infrastructure strategy, which addressed a multitude of things by stitching back degraded open space, by dealing with heat island impacts, overland flows and floods, by building biodiversity and creating recreational and health opportunities that just didn't exist in this part of London. This forward planning enabled the city to springboard into the 2012 Olympics very well prepared, with many policies and plans in place. And what was really clear was the city had very strong, not only economic targets, but environmental and social targets as well, that it was committed to do. And also, learning from previous regeneration projects, they were also very committed, the leadership and the mandate delivered with that, to make sure that the Olympics generated not just an extraordinary project, but it had ripple effects through the areas surrounding it. And in doing that, what it actually delivered was extraordinary benefits to the whole of that eastern corridor. 3 new town centres, new schools, affordable housing, new public transport in terms of rail networks, cycleways, employment, and a raft of new open spaces. This mega project also provided the impetus for best practice and raising the bar in terms of renewable energy targets. Every project, at least 20%. Affordable housing, every housing project, at least 30%. On the Olympic site itself, it was 50%. Plus a whole suite of revitalisation projects, including the transformation of the Lee River from a polluted industrial waterway into a waterway which is clean and usable. And smaller fine-grained neighbourhoods adjoining the site, such as Hackney Wick, which was revitalised using retrofit and adaptive reuse of existing buildings in the neighbourhoods. And if you've ever been there, it's a pretty funky place. But it also included new infrastructure and social housing in this once degraded area. So it's clear urban regeneration can also be achieved through smaller interventions and a rolling project list, as well as mega projects. And that is key to rebalancing the city. In fact, getting all these pieces working together. So the lessons here demonstrate that a shared and compelling vision with clear complementary strategies that are working in the public interest, collaboration and commitment to implementation can deliver multiple benefits over the short, medium and long term. Many of these strategies are beginning to be rolled out, and in fact in Clover Moore's Sustainable Sydney 2030 you can see these being played out year in, year out, incrementally, bit by bit. And many are also embedded in the aspirational plans of the Greater Sydney Plan, yet to be realised. But I guess the imperative here is to ensure that it actually is implemented and Western Sydney is the beneficiary. If we are to rebalance our divided city, we need to make sure Sydney is livable and sustainable and equitable for all Sydneysiders. And fundamentally, this means that the long-term public interest must be front and centre in all our decision-making, in all that we do. And ultimately, this will be better for we the people, the places we live, and the planet we live in. Thank you.